while I sat and taught you. Played this out in my mind a bunch. The crowd would be smaller, I think. That's how they used to do it. When the rabbi would teach, the rabbi would sit and the students would stand. And sometimes it would be hours and hours and hours. No fears today, it won't be hours. But I am glad to be back. I've been away for a couple of weeks and glad to be back, getting ready to just re-enter the fall. We're going to finish our series today, and then next week we'll jump into a new series that I'm going to be calling Extraordinary. So it's about how God takes ordinary things and ordinary people and makes extraordinary things out of them. So we'll be looking at that next week. But for this week, we're going to go back to the end of our series that we've been in calling The Songs We Sing. And just before we do that, I would like to pray. And when I'm praying, my hope is that you are putting yourself in a place of prayer as well. That you're opening to God. See, the next 30 minutes or so that we spend together could be very catalytic. It could be life-changing for you. Or it could just be 30 minutes in which you're thinking about 100 million things that you needed to do, things that you will be doing. But I hope for the time that we're here, since we're here, that it would be catalytic, that it would be life-changing in some way. And I don't know what way that will be. But when we open to God in His presence with one another, there is that very real possibility today that something rich, something wonderful, something beautiful can happen. And why not to you? Why not to you? So I'm going to just be quiet for about 30 seconds. And then I'm going to pray. But during that time, I'm just going to ask you to talk to God yourself quietly. About what you need, about what you think you need, about what you want, about what you hope. And then we'll jump into our final message of the series. So let's pray. Lord, I want a lot of things. I need less. This day I pray that you would meet each of us in the place where we most deeply need to be met. And I don't know how you're going to do that, but I'm just hoping you will. I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart will be pleasing to you. I pray that over the next few minutes that whatever it is that you're wanting us to know, whyever it is that we're here today, that you brought about this divine appointment, that by the time we finish, that it would be a little clearer. I pray for healing. I pray for deliverance. I pray for salvation. I pray for newness of body and mind and spirit. Pray that those who came in with hardness of heart, that those hearts would be broken and made soft towards you and towards those with whom they are bitter. I pray that old wounds would be healed. I trust, God, that as you move among us, that you will speak to us in the ways that we need. Just keep us open and pray. In Jesus' name. Amen. So I know my opening question might be silly, but I'm going to ask you anyway. By show of hands, how many of you believe that it is important to tell the truth? All right, so now I want you to keep your hands up for just a minute. I'm going to ask you another question. How many of you believe it's important to always tell the truth? Okay. Does it change at all for some of you? It may. Okay, you can put them down, thank you. So, why is it that we don't always tell the truth? Not everybody raised their hand, but most of you did. I would say probably if I were to ask you in a private conversation, probably most all, if not all of you, would say, you know what, the truth is an important concept. To tell the truth is important. But there are those times where when confronted with the truth, I'm just unwilling or unable in that moment. Now, I might feel bad after the fact that I didn't tell the truth. And sometimes, I just don't tell the truth. It might be to protect myself. It might be because it's uncomfortable. It might be a whole host of reasons why I don't tell the truth. But truthfully, I don't always tell the truth. I was reading this article this week. It's dated. It was about 10, 12 years old, and the guy was talking about, he did a whole study on does it pay to tell the truth? And he did this nationwide survey. I forget how many people that he talked to, but over the course of the nation, and this is 10 or 12 years old, so it's a little bit dated, but it's still relevant. He asked people about a series of questions about lying and telling the truth. And what he found was that there was a certain percentage of people on a regular basis who lied about things that didn't even matter at all. Because that's sort of how it is. Once you start lying about things, once you lie about something, you'll lie just about anything, possibly. You can't contain it in one compartment. So I was a bit astounded, but then when I thought about it, not so much so. So if I were to ask you, if I were to say to you, I read this study and this guy did this survey and he asked all these people about who told the truth and who didn't and who lied on a regular basis, how many of you guys would say that in his survey you thought that it was 50% or less who lied on a regular basis? How many think it's higher? 75%, 80%. You know what he found was 91%. 91% in this nationwide survey of those he talked to admitted to lying about things on a regular basis that didn't even matter. Which led me to believe, how did we get so fortunate to have the other 9% here in this room? You know, the bottom line is, he says we live in a nation of liars, and he said the reason that we live in a nation of liars is because most people don't think it pays to tell the truth. If they thought it did, they would. So, many of you can probably think about the last time that you didn't tell the truth. If I gave you just a few minutes to think, you would be prompted to think, you know what, I didn't tell the truth. Oftentimes when we don't think about why we're not. And I think it's important to get to the place where we can discover the why, because once we hit that place, if we can deal with that, it causes us not to do it as often. Some of us, bottom line, are just insecure. So when we're having those conversations and people ask us, did you or didn't you, we just don't want to feel inferior. It doesn't feel good. So we puff ourselves up in some slight way to make ourselves appear better than what we really are, right? Sometimes it's just uncomfortable to tell the truth, isn't it? You know, how do I look in this dress? It's sometimes, if you're not thinking about the way that that answer wants to be responded to and how you actually think about it, you're confronted with, do I tell the truth, or do I just say it looks great? Of course, I'm not speaking about my wife at all. But, you know, there's just those little places where we lie. How about cheating? You remember the last time you cheated on something or someone? The author of that article said we live in a nation of liars, but I wonder if we don't live in a nation of cheaters too. I can still to this day remember cheating in my 9th grade English class. I didn't often cheat, but there were those times where I was just unprepared, and I remember having this particular English teacher who was she was in her 80s probably, late 70s. So she had kind of lost her hearing. And I would sit in the back with my friends, and there was a test that we were doing that day that I was just totally unprepared for. And my buddy was like 2 seats over, and he was smarter than I was, and I knew he would know what the answer was to some of the questions. And I could remember starting by just looking over and asking, number 3, what is it? And it ended up being, what is the answer to number 5? Basically. And I can remember to this day, the answer was Saul Bellow, was to the question that I was asking him. Now, that's amazing that this many years later, it's 9th grade English class, that I can remember. And why is it that I remember something so insignificant now? Yeah, I mean, there could be any number of different reasons. Typically, it wasn't a part of my character. I didn't like to cheat. It wasn't like something that I did. But I can remember that day getting answers for something that I was unprepared for. I wasn't willing to deal with the consequences of missing something. I wanted a better grade than what I really had prepared for. But that's a simple example. But the truth of the matter is, I think that maybe less than lying, but we still cheat. We cheat our employer when we don't work a full day's work, right? We cheat our husband and wife and families when we come home at the dinner table or on our phone or computer or texting. We cheat people all the time. What about stealing? Remember the last time you stole something and why you did? I can remember stealing a pair of bowling shoes when I was 17 years old. I thought they looked cool. How many of you have ever been bowling? Bowling shoes don't look cool. But when I was 17, I thought they looked cool, and I walked right on out the door with my bowling shoes on and my bag, and I had given my shoes to my buddy who had like a bowling ball bag that he put in. That's stupid stuff. I was so guilt-ridden over stealing the bowling shoes that a week later, I just went back in and put them back in where I got them from. I was racked with guilt over just a cheap pair of bowling shoes. Can you believe it? To this day, I'm thankful that I was. It means God was at work. I have some conscience. I took something that wasn't mine. Well, I think that there are lots of things that we do in an ongoing way that aren't right. We miss the mark, all of us, in a lot of ways. And what I want us to think about is how when we do something that is wrong and it produces feelings of guilt, how do we deal with that? Because there are a lot of different ways to deal with guilt. How many of you, in an ongoing way, deal with issues where you feel guilty about something? It visits you at least on a weekly basis. Okay, so this is going to be valuable to you. There are those of us who maybe deal with it less often, but there is this place of conviction where when we do things that aren't right, that God's speaking to us about that. And a lot of times, in response, what we will do is we will run, or we will hide, we will avoid, we will blame, we will make excuses. How many of you guys just, when confronted with an issue, tend as a reflexive action to point the finger towards somebody else? You make an excuse or you blame somebody else for the reason for why you are where you are. Anybody be willing to own that? Yeah, we do that sometimes. How many of you tend to just avoid and deal with issues? You hide and run from it. It chases after you. You can't run far enough, but you use that as a strategy. Anybody cover over or hide, pretend something doesn't exist? Yeah, these are strategies that we employ, okay? But what I want to do is introduce to you a strategy of confession. Now, the whole notion of confession conjures a lot of different things in all of our minds, some good, some not so good. But what I want to do by the end of today is to help you understand the value of confession towards producing in you a healthy life and actually leading you to a place of deep and abiding joy. So if you have your Bibles and you want, please turn with me to Psalm 32. Psalm 32. So we've been doing this series called The Songs We Sing. And each week what we've done is we've taken a different emotion or state of being and we've talked about how do I connect with God in this place? How do I connect with God when I'm happy? How do I connect with God when I'm sad? How do I connect with God when I'm filled with doubts? How do I connect with God when I'm afraid? How do I connect with God when I'm angry? How do I connect with God? And Janet spoke with us last week about how, or the week before last, about how do I connect with God when I'm waiting? There are all these different places that our most natural response isn't always to turn to God in that place, is it? I mean, when you're angry, is it many of your natural responses to turn to God? Or to some place of self-righteous judgment or vindication? Or when you're afraid, is it your most natural response to turn towards God or to run away? There are these places that we hit in our lives, and what I wanted you overall to discover is that there's no place in your life that you can find yourself that isn't a good place to turn towards and to make connection with God. No matter where you are and what you're feeling. God can and wants to help you deal with any of these states of being. Now today we finish the series and we're looking at how do I connect with God when I feel guilty? When you do something to someone, it is not your most natural inclination to want to be with them, is it? Like when you've hurt somebody or you've done something that you know is wrong, you typically want to create space and avoid them, don't you? Countless times I've hurt people, and eventually I'll get to that place where I can summon the courage to have that interaction, but immediately, I don't really want to see them. I don't really want to have that encounter. I don't really want to go there. There's maybe a lot of reasons for that, but that is oftentimes how I feel when I'm guilty. It's not my most reflexive response to turn towards the person that I've hurt and to confront the situation. Well, David is going to teach us today in Psalm 32. It's one of 7 psalms that they call penitential psalms. Psalms that talk about forgiveness and confession and the need for wholeness in our lives. And David, if those of you who are here are not familiar with him, he was a great king, and he was probably the greatest and most successful king Israel ever knew. He was a man after God's own heart. He did incredible things that I don't have the time to go into. But he was, if you were looking for the model of someone who is successful, that you would want to be like, it would be David. And yet, on the other hand, if you were looking at someone that you would want to learn from who not to be like, he would be the exact same person. His successes and his failures about evened out. He was despicable in some of the ways that he dealt with people and nations. And so when we look at this guy and we listen to this psalm, we're going to learn something from the way in which he dealt with his own junk, his own guilt. Because he didn't oftentimes have the best strategy of dealing with guilt either. And for those of us who tend to want to run or hide or make excuses or blame or cover up, I'm just going to tell you off the bat, those aren't good strategies to employ. That doesn't mean that when you leave here you won't be inclined to do that. I'm just saying that they will not serve you well in the long term. I'm going to give you a strategy that will serve you much better if you will begin to employ that strategy as a part of your life. So let's just begin by looking at verses 1 and 2 in Psalm 32. This is the beginning. As we walk through, we're just going to break down some of the things that we learned from David as he writes this one of 7 penitential psalms. He says, "Oh, what joy for those whose disobedience is forgiven, whose sin is put out of sight. Yes, what joy for those whose record the Lord has cleared of guilt, whose lives are lived in complete honesty." I think sometimes when we think about sin, missing the mark, things when we mess up and do wrong, I think oftentimes we get this picture or image that we need to confess for God's sake, right? That there is this rupture that needs to be repaired, and we just have to own that up so that God will then forgive us, right? We want forgiveness. We want a clean record. We want to live lives in total honesty. We do not always do that. And so oftentimes we think that confession is for God. But what I hear from David in the first part of Psalm 32 is that confession really is also for us. Now, when we think about confession, again, this probably brings to mind a lot of different images that people have had over the course of time, and some of those may not be good at all. But when David talks about coming clean, and he talks about God forgiving him, he talks about a certain kind of life. He says, when our record is clear and our lives are lived in total honesty, there is what? What did he say there is? You see it twice in 2 verses. Joy. The blessing of joy. Now, how many of you guys could use just a little more joy in your life? I could. That's the fruit of the Spirit that I recognize exists in the least amount of quantities in my life. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. There's that place of joy. Now, there's reasons why joy flourishes or doesn't flourish. But in this particular psalm, what David is saying is, listen, there is no better life than a life where the things, when you are living your life, where your record or your slate is clear and clean. It's the best way to live. And he said the way you get there is when you realize you've done something wrong, that you've missed the mark, is that you confess that, you speak that to God. You don't run, you don't hide, you don't avoid, you don't evade, you don't blame, you don't make excuses. You confess. You own it. And so, as we start, I think it's important that we understand that confession is for us. Sometimes we think it's all about God. David is saying confession is for you too. It will serve you well. And then he talks about a time when he didn't use this strategy. Listen to what he says in verse 3. When I refused to confess my sin, my body wasted away, and I groaned all day long. That is not a pretty picture. When I refused. Have you ever been in that place where you knew you did something wrong, but you just refused to deal rightly with it? How'd that make you feel? Not great. David gives this extreme picture where he talks about his body wasting away. He says, I groaned all day long. Day and night your hand of discipline was heavy on me. My strength evaporated like water in the summer heat. So have you been in this place, like David, where you knew something was wrong? You knew you were responsible for it, but you just wouldn't own it? Just so that I'm not alone, is there anybody else who's ever been in that place? It felt miserable, right? But you keep employing the same strategy anyway. And day passes after day passes after day passes, and then it gets so long that you don't know how to get back. And the thought of confession is 20 times harder than it would have been in the beginning. But now you've added so much time to it, you just don't know what to do. You feel trapped. Sin thrives on self-deception. Because there will come a point in time where after you've told this lie enough, you'll begin to believe it. And then you'll begin to think that everybody else is crazy or wrong. Where in the place where you had done wrong, if you would have taken responsibility for it immediately, you would have never gotten to this place where you've now weaved your life and surrounded it with falsehood. And it gets so bad that you'll actually start to believe your own lies. You won't even think you're lying anymore. You'll just be living it. That happens. And so sin thrives on self-deception, and self-deception thrives on silence. That's why David says it's important to break the silence. It's important to employ a different strategy. The silence must be broken. He said, when I refused to confess my sin, my body wasted away. Day and night I groaned, my strength evaporated. I had nothing left. So if there are those of you who are here, who are in this place, and maybe it's been a day or a week or a month or a lifetime where you you know you're going down a wrong trail. It's not serving you well, but you just can't find it within you to turn it around. Basically what he says here is that the moment you begin to shoot straight and deal rightly with this issue, God will not only bring about the liberation of your soul, but he will begin to bring about healing in your life. And so at the end, and he does this like 3 separate occasions in his psalm. The psalm is a very brief psalm. He writes this little word, Selah, which is kind of an interlude. It just means think about that. Just think about that for a minute. Think about the fact that there is this place in confession where you begin by breaking silence. Because silence is not good when it comes to dealing with the things that we've done or haven't done that have led us into a place of falsehood. So he says, break the silence. He continues on in verse 5. He says, finally I confessed all my sins to you, and I stopped trying to hide my guilt. I said to myself, I will confess my rebellion to the Lord, and you forgave me, and all my guilt is gone. Does anybody see what method he was using here in relation to the sin that he had committed, what he was trying to do previously? You see what he says he was doing? What did he say he stopped trying to do? He stopped trying to hide his guilt. He stopped trying to hide his guilt. When we do things that we wished we hadn't done, part of it is not just that it's wrong, it's that we feel wrong. There's guilty feelings that are attached. And so overcoming not only the wrongness of the issue, there's this issue of overcoming the guilt that accompanies that. So David, what he does is he renounces an old strategy. He says, the way I was going about doing this, hiding, wasn't working for me. It becomes completely clean. And so I just thought it might be appropriate when he hits this period of Selah to ask you, when's the last time that you came completely clean on something you did or didn't do that you knew was causing you harm or someone else harm? Both. Can you remember? When's the last time somebody did that to you? They came clean to you. See, it sort of goes both ways. And so what I'm saying here is, we hit this place in Psalm 32 where David is taking us on a journey. And there is this progression of what has to happen when we come to this place of coming clean. And part of coming clean is dealing with the guilt. And that's the reason that most of us avoid it, because at some point the guilt becomes so overwhelming that the thought of coming clean, we have to weigh against the other. I think I can deal with this. I think I can drag this a little bit longer because this seems harder to me than coming clean. And what he says is the old ways that we used to employ in dealing with our wrongdoing, they just don't work. And there will have to be some measure of grace and some great measure of courage. But if you want to live in joy, you're going to have to come clean. Now, part of the reason we don't come clean is because when we do come clean, people don't always treat us rightly. They kind of hold stuff over our head. They don't respond well when we come clean. Here's what I think. If we were all more gracious when people made their confession, people would make more confession. But the reason we don't tend to make more confession is because we're afraid of what the other person is going to do when we do. Right? The reason we're afraid to make confession is we're afraid what's going to happen if I share my true self. So David says, I've got to summon the courage to deal with that before God first. I've got to at least start there. Because he's trusting not only a sovereign and almighty God who cares for him when he's good, but also when he's bad. David, great success. David, great failure. He could go to God in either place. And that's why we've been singing these songs. In every place we find ourselves, we can go to God and we can come clean. Honest acknowledgement of our sin always leads to healing. It does. I'm convinced that some of the reasons that many of us deal with issues of health have to do with issues of sin that we've allowed to stay resident in our lives for long periods of time. And eventually it just breaks us down. And so the beginning place of healing starts with us. I mean, how long do you want to carry stuff that's so heavy with you on your journey? It's just much easier to travel light than it is with packing a whole lot of junk on you and dragging it with you. Acknowledgement, breaking the silence, dealing with our guilt, opening ourselves before God leads to the healing of our hearts, to the healing of our soul. It also leads to the healing of the relationship between God and us. Where once there is a fracture, now there is a renewing. Now there is a connection. Now there is some measure of relationship. Until such time, there's division there. And we know that and we feel that. And then finally, it leads to healing our relationships with one another. I'm going to tell you something that you probably already know. You cannot be in a healthy relationship with someone to whom you are not telling the truth. If there is deception or falsehood or anything that exists between you, you cannot maintain a healthy relationship with that person. However, when you live your life in complete honesty, there are going to be things that come along with that. David ultimately says, you will get to this place of great joy. You will be free. So often the bondage that we find ourselves in is the bondage of our own doing. We put ourselves there. David says, you don't need to stay there. Honest acknowledgement leads to healing. Healing of your mind, body, and spirit. Healing of your relationship with God. Healing of your relationship with one another. Oftentimes, we think we sin in a vacuum. We do not. The things we do and don't do impact one another. We hurt each other, whether we intend to or not. David says there's a way by which, if we will choose as a strategy to deal with our failures, it will serve us well and those we live with. Let's move towards the end of this psalm here, verses 6 and 7. Therefore, let all the godly pray to you while there is still time, that they may not drown in the flood waters of judgment. For you are my hiding place. You protect me from trouble. You surround me with songs of victory. I was just thinking, what if we saw God as our hiding place? That when we went to God, it was actually a place of protection. That we could actually, when we're afraid, run. Instead of running from God, run to God. If God is light, which is a metaphorical description of God that the Scriptures use, then wouldn't it be good if you find yourself in darkness to run to light rather than away from it? There's this place where David, after coming through all of his junk, says, you know what? I see you now as I've opened my life to you completely. I see you now as a place of refuge, a place of protection, a place that I can come and be safe. And then he says, and you surround me with songs of victory. What would it be like to live a life where you are surrounded by songs of victory? You know all those songs we sing to ourselves that are not songs of victory? That are more depressing in nature than not? You know those songs you have in your head about who you are? about what a miserable failure we are and have been and will always be. I can't do it. I keep messing this up. That song you sing, what if you were surrounded by songs of victory, songs that made you believe, you know what, I have messed it up, but I'm getting better. I'm moving in the right direction. And by God's grace and with His strength, I am seeing progress and improvement, and I will, by faith, have victory over this latest and greatest failure. What if you saw it that way? David does. David did some despicable things. I mean, if we would weigh against, we were looking at our sins over against some of his, I mean, he went out, at least most of them, right? And yet, he has found something that you and I need to find. And that is in the place where we most need to be met, in the place where we are most guilt-laden, he has found freedom. We need to be free to live the life that God calls us to. What if we were surrounded by songs of victory, even when we fail? What if when we failed, we knew we could go to God, because we would find in God a place of refuge, a place of strength, a place of comfort? Well, as he continues his psalm, there's this shift in voice, because David has been, it's basically been David's voice up until this point. And then we get to this place in the last couple verses where it's God's voice to David. It changes. Listen to verse 8 and following. Then the Lord says, I will guide you along the best pathway for your life. I will advise you and watch over you. Do not be like a senseless horse or mule that needs a bit and a bridle to keep it under control. Many sorrows come to the wicked, but unfailing love surrounds those who trust the Lord. So rejoice in the Lord and be glad, all you who obey him. Shout for joy, all you whose hearts are pure. So, what if you knew that not only could you be forgiven, but that you could have a new life? Not only for the incident at hand would God give you forgiveness, but he would actually lead you, he would guide you into a new way of living. Wouldn't that be cool? Where you no longer had to be stuck by the things that have kept you stuck for days and weeks and months and years and years. That's his promise. After David pours out his heart, he says to him, listen, my goal for you is, I not only want to forgive you, I want to lead you. I want to lead you into a new way of life. I want to offer you something that you haven't had. I want to offer you freedom. I want to offer you joy. I want to offer you an abundant life. You want that? This is good stuff, right? I mean, who doesn't want this? But like all good things, they come at some cost. They come at a price, because to get to this place, it means that it requires of us the kind of honesty that maybe we've not employed in our own lives. That self-searching honesty that says, you know what, I'm tired of being a fraud. I'm tired of trying to puff myself up so that you'll see me as better than what I really am. What I really am is, and always, always, always with everybody, that picture is going to be mixed. It's going to be. There are no good people and bad people. We are the same. But by the grace of God at work in our lives, redeeming and renovating us, there's no real hope for us to move beyond these places of stuckness to the places that are bad. And so that's why David says you break the silence with honest confession and take responsibility, and you own what you've done. And then what happens is what? You're led into this final state, this final place of what? You end where you started. Who And yet over and over and over, you find this word joy. The key, he says, to discovering joy is just being honest with who you are and who you're not, with how God made you, with a spirit of humility. We don't go and then, based on what you heard from Vincent say, then get to say and do whatever we want to do, because then we just go to God and he forgives us anyway. That's not the idea. The idea is he wants to lead us into a new way of living. Right? We don't just get off the hook for the things that we aren't doing right. He leads us into a new way of living so that we become people who want to do the right thing, more than we don't. The trouble with lying, cheating, and stealing, all of those things, we would say they're not high values, but when pressed, we will do them because we're going to be uncomfortable, because we're going to be not seen as good as we want to be seen, because we're going to have to deal with the responsibility of having missed the mark. There's reasons why we do those things. And David just says, listen, it's bad strategy to veer off and then pretend like you didn't do it. Come clean. And with honest acknowledgement and an openness before me, I can begin a healing process that will lead you into a new way of living. I want to say one last thing before we close. It is incumbent upon you and me, if we are wanting the people in our lives to find the courage to take the step that I have just asked you to take in light of Psalm 32, that we be people who create the space where that confession can happen without getting beat up and judged and maligned and sorry they ever did it. Now that might be hard for you to do, especially when that person hurts you deeply. It is not easy to offer grace when someone wounds you. It is not. The only way you can offer grace when someone wounds you is to have had grace appropriated in your own life from the King of Kings, who gives you what you most need so that you can then give it to others. You cannot give something you do not possess. But if grace has been applied in your life, and you feel the love and mercy of God, then the reason that you are is to set you free to give that to somebody else. Confession is extremely important. We have to be a place and a people who create the space where that can occur without fear of condemnation. Confession comes with a contrite heart. It doesn't come with an attitude. It doesn't come with excuse making. It doesn't come with blaming. You ever had anybody apologize to you, but after the fact it didn't really feel like much of an apology at all? It just felt like they were kind of sorry that they were caught and they just had wanted to get out of the situation, but they really weren't sorry. When we confess our sin, we're sorry because it's wounded us, it's wounded our relationship with God, and it's wounded our relationship with one another. The amazing thing about it is, if we do that, it produces joy. That's why we sing the song. That's why we sing the penitential song. We do the hard work because we know it's taking us to a place of release and relief and freedom and one day, joy. So for those of you who are feeling guilty, there is some work to be done. The hardest work is coming clean with yourself. And then once you do that, you can come clean before God. And then once you do that, He will give you the grace to start doing that with others. I'll tell you in advance, people don't always handle it rightly, but don't give up on the process just because people don't respond well to it. Do the right thing because it's right. Do the right thing because it's right, and you will find that God will use that to lead you into a new way of living. Amen? Amen. Let's do that. Confession. Bad for the reputation, good for the soul. Good for the soul. Let's pray. some of us just need to break the silence with what we've been sitting on for a long, long time. You know we're afraid. But I pray this day that there will be steps taken in the direction to do that. I pray, God, that you would increasingly become that one to whom we can come and see as a place of refuge, place of rescue, one who provides us with the grace and the strength that we need to move into a new way of life. Set us free from being phonies. Set us free from being frauds. Set us free from trying to do things that make ourselves look better than what we are. Let us be content with how you've made us. And let us follow you as you lead us to a new way of life. In Christ we pray. So the team's going to come back up and we're going to